Good evening. You're welcome again to the Journey 2020. And I'm Dr. John Robertson, and our slogan is, the journey is from me to you and from you to me. And as we start our program tonight, I cannot but notice that my good co-host, even though he's got a little gray in his jumpsuit here, he's in red and white. And I wonder what that may mean, Charles, my co-host Charles Morris. Okay, go ahead, Charles.
You know what? I have to laugh because I was talking earlier about, I need to go home. And I need to go home and get some blue and some white. Uh-huh. And because I didn't make it home, I didn't get into the blue and white. Uh-huh. So with people, by the way, hello everyone, I'm Charles Morrison. Welcome to the Journey 2020. And today's show, for those who figure out why are you talking about blue and white, and we're going to get into that. Mm-hmm. But as you know, for the past maybe few years, as a matter of fact, hazing has been in the news, has been topping the news for different reasons all around the country. I'd actually brought this topic up with a friend of mine that you will meet, which I give a hard time constantly because he wears a different color, and that's what we do. And for those out there that are not part of a sorority or fraternity, that's just part of what we do. We truly love each other. Okay. But actually, you know what? I'm going to skip over a little something just to show you. I have people come and ask me about joining the fraternity, or joining a fraternity, or even joining the fraternity that I'm part of, Phi Beta Sigma. And what I tell them, I tell them, I say, what you need to do is that you need to do your research, okay? And you need to figure some things out for yourself, because the bottom line is, if they're doing what they're supposed to do, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if they're doing what they're supposed to do. So you need to figure that out for yourself. And some of you, we don't want you in. No, just kidding. No, that's a joke. That's a joke. But honestly, the bottom line is that it is here to serve. And if that's what they're doing, then it really shouldn't matter. It's when you're younger, when you're in college, you get into this thing right here. But as you get older, it becomes more of a joke, and we tease and we joke each other. But it truly should always be a brother sisterhood among them all. Exactly. But anyway, we're talking about fraternities and sororities, and we're talking about hazing. We should talk about pledging, and when does it turn into hazing, or when it did turn into hazing. And when did it become a bad thing, or when did it become dangerous? So that's what the show is about today.
Well, Charles, now that you've done that wonderful preamble, and since this is a good friend of yours, I'm going to let you do the introduction. Okay?
It's so funny because there's a lot that I can say in the sense, so I'm just going to try to keep it short.
Keep it clean.
Not clean. You know what? Honestly, Dr. Robinson, I had a great deal more respect for Moses more than what he knows. Because as you know, my annual event that I do every year, and I started teaming up with Carter Tabernacle Church about 3 or 4 years ago. And I saw this brother. The event was over. Everybody gone home. He was over there sweating. Okay. There was a lot of work to be done because they have to break down everything and put everything back. He was over there by himself, doing what needs to be done. And I know from the other things around the church and some of the stuff that he has to deal with and keep a smile on his face.
Amen.
Okay.
So that night I was like, you know what? Even though he never had a jump shot, he's a cool dude.
Now, Moses, he had to get that thing in there with the jump
clean.
shot.
I said keep it clean, but okay, that's all right. We all agree here. We all agree.
But anyway, Moses is somebody that I work with over at Carter Tabernacle Church, and he's a really good brother, and he's a Kappa, by the way. You know, so we.
Yes, I am.
I never fought him for that, but you know, knowing that he's a good brother in his heart. Okay.
It gave you a little bit more motivation.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I excused him. Because I know what's in his heart. And so that's all that matters, because what's in his heart. And so, and actually we had talked about this topic a few months ago, right?
Yes, we did.
Right, and he said, this is something that I want to do. So he's here today, and we will be calling
Terry Hawkins King.
Terry Hawkins King.
Okay.
And Moses, if I left something out that you would like to share with us, you know, you can go ahead and do that.
In terms of?
Just you and part of how you, or why did you want to talk about this as well as I want to talk about it as well?
Okay, yeah. The topic of hazing has been a very, very, very sore subject, not necessarily with me, but you know, in our communities, period. And unfortunately, because you know, the many of us who have pledged to fraternities or sororities, who have pledged, quote unquote, for the right reasons, there are many, unfortunately, you know, subsequently that have taken what our forefathers and foresisters have established and defamed it, for lack of a better word, through all types of maladaptive behaviors. And even more so from the black perspective. From the black perspective, it's even more disheartening, because all that we have seen, rather, over the years on the news has been primarily African American fraternities or sororities. So it's become magnified in our African American culture, and even more grotesquely, it's transcended from the college ranks down to the high school levels, and now even more so now to the middle school levels. So it's gone from fraternities to other ancillary organizations, football teams, band programs, even choirs have adopted these quote unquote rituals, and unfortunately it's gotten out of hand over the years.
Now, Moses, I want just ask you to put a pause on that.
Yes.
As you mentioned, choirs, that caught my attention, and just elucidate on that a little bit. Just talk about it a little bit.
Well, some choirs may hate me after I say this, but over the years, I guess because we have taken such pride in our organizations, I think the fraternities and sororities have set such a standard on its output of memberships and doing things in the community. Other organizations have adopted those types of initiations. I won't use the word pledging, but it has graduated to that. We've got choirs in colleges and universities, and even some high schools that actually initiate those first timers, you know, as they come in. And well, we may not necessarily see the results in a negative fashion as we have with our fraternities and sororities. It exists even on those in those venues.
That's interesting. One of the things that I wanted to do as we're getting into talking about hazing is to also talk about just what the function of fraternities or groups like that, or sororities, you know, those groups are really designed to do. Because one of the things in my clinical practice, I've heard several parents say, well, I don't want my kids to get involved with a fraternity or a sorority. They're nothing but a big gang. And you know, and even several college-educated clients I've had said, yeah, all they do is just hang out with each other, have all these handshakes and signals and signs, etc., and have their nose up in the air. And I'd like you to just touch on that a little bit from your perspective. What do you think about that point of view?
Well, I've experienced the exact same thing in my clinical practice over the years as well with some of my college students.
By the way, I'm just going to put a pause as Charles talked about your jump shot. I want to talk about the fact that you're the president of the Central Florida Mental Health Association.
No, not the president. I was a member.
Okay.
Actually, I'm an inactive member, rather.
Okay.
But my credentials are I'm a mental health therapist here in the Central Florida area for over 15 years.
Okay.
I'm also the director of operations and outreach at Carter Tabernacle CME Church.
Okay. That's why you were the last guy. Cleaning up the. Okay.
Yeah, always.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'm always the last guy.
Okay.
But
yeah, go ahead.
It's one of those things where, again, over the years, the trickle-down effect, folks who are familiar with colleges and universities, parents, they themselves have either attended colleges or have relatives who have gone to college or even followed colleges and universities, have become familiar with fraternities and sororities. And at some point in juncture, as their children go on to post-secondary education, that becomes one of the venues that they want their youngsters to go through, in addition to the educational part.
Right.
And needless to say, that would either be a sport or, in this case, a band or music program. And eventually, they would like them to pledge. And unfortunately, what has happened over the years, as we've seen in the past 15 years, it's gotten so out of hand now. Many of today's parents are very fearful of their kids pledging. Even those of us who are members of fraternities and sororities, we don't want them to go through not necessarily what we went through, but what's going on today. So this is magnified. Right. So there is that fear because it just appears that fraternities and sororities have lost that foundation that we have been charged to do in this community. When we leave post-secondary education.
Right.
So there is that innate fear from parents because of that.
Okay. And I want to do self-disclosure, a full disclosure here, and that is, as we talk about it, that audience, I'm also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, a NOOP, and it was interesting because when I went to college, I didn't have really a clue, because I was one of the first people in my family to ever go to college.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And it was through friends that I made in college that happened to be from New York, and it said, well, listen, why don't you check this out? And I was approached by a number of organizations, including those other groups, like Omega Psi Phi. And,
what you mean the other groups? What do you the other groups?
Yeah,
those other groups.
Yeah, some groups with the blue and white on.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what they are.
Okay.
But what I want to say is that there was this sense of, okay, how do I choose? What are these groups really about? And I guess for me, I felt, and again, this is not touting, Kappas, against Qs or Alphas, etc. But my personality and the kind of things that I like to do and the kind of conversation I had just happened to flow along with this particular set of friends that I had. Now, I had a roommate that he decided that he was going to go to another, fraternity,
which was,
and unfortunately, that was Alpha Kappa Alpha. Okay, I'm sorry, not AKA. Sorry, A Phi A. Okay,
Alpha.
You're right, the Alphas. Okay, and we remained staunch friends throughout. There was a friendly competition that was there. There was at times a competition for lady friends, etc.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, but the sense was that at the time, and I'll place myself in the early to mid '60s, going through college, that we were all felt that we were there for a purpose.
Exactly.
And that part of that purpose was the sense of having some connections to, quite frankly, people who shared some of our values.
Exactly.
And I guess that's what I wanted to ask. If well, firstly, if that's what you found, and is that still a value, in to fraternities and sororities?
Well, and you're right. I mean, I went through the exact same experience. Now, in my case, though, I had an older brother who was an Omega man, not a Q dog. He was an Omega man.
Okay, I like that.
And
much
I had
better.
another,
Okay.
I had another relative, close relative of mine, who was also a Kappa gent, which those were the personas back then, before 1977. And I looked up to those guys. So, so my closest understanding of fraternities and sororities, without being physically around those groups, was through my brothers and my relatives. But that was individually. So as I got to my college experience, that was the first thing from my mind. First thing from my mind. But I would agree, definitely, as I did see fraternities and sororities on the campus, there was that sense of camaraderie and unity for a sole purpose. Now, the first sole purpose that we're there for is education, needless to say. But the rationale behind the fraternities and sororities that exist on any given campus is to take that educational experience from a group standpoint and then move on beyond your post-secondary education to serve. So there, but the only difference would be, needless to say, in whatever it is individually that each fraternity or sorority had that drew you. There was going to be some similarity or some connection rather that drew you specifically to that fraternity or sorority. So that did exist, at that time. Now in today's, time of fraternities and sororities, I do believe that still exists. I think there is still a foundational piece that still lies there that is always going to draw someone to a fraternity or sorority. Unfortunately, most of our kids that are coming in to post-secondary education have already had some experience and some facsimile of a fraternity or sorority coming from a high school level. So they already have their perception already molded in their mind. I go back again and say, unfortunately, because they have taken some of the movements, rituals, initiations, taking that same format, they are, they're already coming in prepared already, and they already know what fraternity or sorority they want to go ahead and pledge. And that may change based on recruitment from those particular entities. So yeah, there does exist, that still that social connection, or those similarities rather, they're going to draw any individual into a fraternity. I do believe that it has transcended though from whence we came, and it's evolved a little bit more. I'm not sure if it still has that same level of integrity that it had before.
I have a question then. Oh, no. Go ahead.
And I think that's where, as we're talking about hazing, at the time, let's say by going online, as we call it, that it was there was a sense of both trust, in as we call them, the big brothers, that we would be not only challenged but also cared for.
Exactly.
Exactly. And so the when I heard about, and many people remember the terrible death of Robert Champion at FAMU in being hazed as part of a hazing ritual for Florida A&M, that when I read that, and I said, that's just out of my imagination, that hazing would be that brutal. But then when I looked and did a little bit of research and found that there were other instances, both at FAMU and at other schools,
Many other schools.
Many other schools, exactly. It's interesting that FAMU, because of the sensationalizing of Robert Champion's death, became, unfortunately, almost like the poster child
Yes.
of what can go wrong
Yes.
with, with hazing. So I wanted to ask you what, again, with black colleges versus white colleges or other colleges, et cetera. Is hazing more of a problem in black colleges, or is it the same, or just why is there that much more of attention being paid to this particular case? Let's say with Robert Champion and folks like that.
Well, I was going to ask a similar question, similar, the same but different, and I'm gonna ask the same question but in a different way. I was speaking. I called I tried calling my uncle, but he didn't answer. So I called his wife. My uncle, who is 79, his wife I think is about 75. So she's a Delta, and my uncle is a Sigma. And so I said, "Tell me about how was it when you were coming along?" And she just gave me an incident of someone who she said was a little upset with her because they liked the same guy. So I guess this sister was over her and she was trying to make her do something. So she said, "Well, what you asking me to do? No, sister." So she's getting ready to step off line. So she went and told one of the other sisters, "I'm leaving," and she told why, and the girl said, "Well, that's ridiculous." Da da da. So the bottom line is this right here. She said it wasn't anything abusive. You did what you were supposed to do. Because my question that I have is, there's pledging and then there's hazing.
That's correct.
Okay,
That
so
is correct.
when did the hazing become part of the pledging? And then the other part that I wanted to ask was that when I started school, I didn't know how blessed I was because I had no concept of the fact that I was going to have the black college experience without going to the black college. So I was going to school over in Daytona. Didn't even think about Bethune-Cookman College, university at the time.
Right.
So, but I lived back then on 2nd Avenue, which was now called, back then it was 2nd Avenue.
Right.
Well, I was every bit of 8 minutes from walking to the campus of Bethune. So I was on campus every day. Okay. Yeah. So I had the experience of not attending Bethune, but having the black college experience.
Okay.
So when I'm I'm on campus and I see like 30 girls walking in a row, and every other step they squat and quack, and I'm standing there like, what the, but pretty soon you get used to it.
Right.
I walk in the cafeteria, I see some guys with their hand tied behind their back and they sitting there eating, and I'm going, what is this? I'm thinking like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Pretty soon you get used to it. So again, my question is like what I'm asking, because I had that experience. So I remember when they was trying to start the chapter of Kappas out at UCF. I remember that because I was out there at that time. Okay, then the same thing with the Sigmas, whatever. Again, the question is, do you think the experience of pledging and part of being the fraternity is different than, let's just say, UCF and being at FAMU or Cookman or Southern or Grambling?
Yes, for the most part, the answer will be yes. Now, the yes part will be, as you talked about, let's say predominantly white establishments, there's a cultural aspect that resides on that campus. So conversely, your fraternities or sororities will adapt to that culture, on that particular campus. Now, it doesn't mean that if you get a black fraternity or sorority on a predominantly white campus, they won't make some other adjustments to what they're accustomed to. But now, going back to a predominantly all black campus, yes, there are some major differences in how we initiate and how we pledge and our view of initiations and pledgings. White campuses historically, you never heard that much back then. You really don't hardly hear that much of it back now. Now, for the exception of maybe, alcohol, the drinking scenarios, and that's pretty much what you heard coming out of the white fraternities for many years. So nothing that you would necessarily play up, because that's normal. That's what you do at college. You drink. However, on our black campuses, unfortunately, where we would pretty much do the exact same, scenarios as the white fraternities, there were other. Forgive me for using this statement again. There were other cultural aspects, and I would dare say negative cultural aspects that were brought into the pledge or initiation of a new person. So that would be the difference. No difference in a white neighborhood and a black neighborhood. What's the difference between those two neighborhoods? It's a cultural thing. Unfortunately, the derogatory parts of our cultures, alcohol, drugs, violence, all those things, unfortunately have come into play more so over the years than now. Now, I would probably also want to defray some of that question to our other guest, Terry King.
Actually, I just had him. He had to take a call.
Okay. But yeah, there is a difference.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there is a difference, and I would have to use the word again. There is a cultural difference, and that would be the difference between what you would see on a white campus, predominantly white campus rather, as opposed to what you would see on a predominantly black campus. And they're unfortunately almost night and day.
Okay.
They're almost night and day.
One of the things, and this gives me a chance to share my experience, exactly. And as I said, I went to Michigan State, and there were at the time I think there were about 300 of us, and that's including the Africans, the island folks, anybody that had a shade of brown on them.
So less than 10%.
It was an on-campus population of 34,000.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we were more like 1%.
1%, yeah.
But there was a very tight black community, and as a matter of fact, in the experience that I had, a lot of folks said, well, you haven't had the black college experience. And I said, well, listen, my experience in college was very black, okay? But what I wanted to say is that, and it triggered something as you talked about the different cultures. One of the wonderful things that we had was not only frat brothers that were juniors and seniors, but there were also graduate folks that were there.
Yes.
One of the folks that was one of the big brothers, what just happened to be, and this is Lansing, Michigan, this happened to be Bob Little, who was Malcolm X's brother.
Okay.
Okay. Another one of the folks who was a graduate advisor, and I think that in fraternities with young men going through or young women, having some senior heads around, I do believe makes a difference. So our graduate advisor, who was a Kappa also, was a brother named Floyd Malvo. Okay, Floyd's daughter is who you see on CNN as an announcer.
Oh wow!
Etc.
Okay.
And Floyd went on to be the head of the med school at Howard University.
Oh wow!
Okay.
Okay.
And so and why I say that is not to drop names as such, but to say that the characters of those senior brothers that guided us through, that it wasn't by chance that many of the folks that came out to do some very productive things. Right. Because those big brothers passed on some essential values. And one of the values, and I want to get back into hazing, and one of the values was a sense of commitment, a sense of excellence, but also, interestingly, a sense of compassion.
Okay.
Okay?
I agree.
And that was one of the unexpected things, because in my background, part of my young years, I grew up in Harlem. And I did not expect compassion from many of the folks that I grew up with. And so to see both the sense of black men standing tall and also expecting a sense of excellence, but also having that sense of compassion was for me not only a unique but a lasting experience.
Okay.
And so that's one of the reasons why I asked the question of how do you see things being different today than back then when?
You hit the nail on the head, though. You hit the nail on the head. But let's go back again to the word culture. Within any given culture, and I would say from the onset, foundationally, there are values that guide, you as you go along. As time has progressed, each new person that comes into the fold. Now, I know back in the day, during my time, there was this period where folks wanted numbers as opposed to quality. Now, I got to give the alpha some dap. Alphas.
Okay.
The alphas were very hard, very difficult. I mean, very, very, very steadfast on getting quality. They didn't care if the popular guy. They didn't care about not getting the popular guy if he was not of quality. So they would have lines that probably have the smallest lines. And most folks thought that was kind of funny. Oh, you can't get anybody. No, they aren't out there. So we would rather have quality to carry on our goals, outside into community, than to have folks deface the fraternity.
Right.
So what ended up happening over time during my period, we had a rash of folks wanting numbers. You saw lines with like 20, 30 plus, on these lines. And I guarantee you, I'm not sorry for saying it. Didn't have the GPAs. They were popular, yet they did not have any educational foundation. So they were getting numbers. So from that, you start getting, the neophytes not coming through, who really just kind of skated through. It is what it is. Who kind of skated through, and now they have a chance to play somebody else. There's that sense of power, and even worse, there's that sense of entitlement. I went through it. Now you're going to go through it. And I think you mentioned what your aunt had said about the personal issue.
Well, yeah, and the same thing happened with my uncle because of his last name, and they were giving him a hard time, and so it was almost like time out. Same thing.
Yeah,
same thing.
And there's a difference now. Let's be careful. You can tease somebody just something in general, but when you isolate an individual's weakness to a point where it tears them down, but you're not building them back up,
right?
Then there's no benefit to this pledgee now. There's not going to be any benefit to this pledgee.
It's a power play.
It's a power play. But again, I go back to that term again, sense of entitlement. And this is beyond and prior to even pledging, because in your upbringing, because you were teased, you were cast out, whatever the case may be. Now I have an opportunity to be somebody in a fraternity or sorority. Now I can just kind of get that out my system, with a new pledgee. And we tend to personalize, or should I say, they tend to personalize minuscule issues that have no relevance to the fraternity or sorority. And now we have, instead of pledging now we have hazing.
But doesn't that just go back to who we are in everyday life and how
Exactly.
we love power?
Exactly.
And if we don't have somebody to supervise us, then we just do our thing because it makes us feel as if though
powerful.
Right, power. So it's about power and
power control.
Our inability to know what to do with it or how to handle it. So it carries over to everyday life.
Right.
And you made a point earlier about having the advisor. Now I served as Dean of Pledgees for 2 years, and I served as Dean of Pledgees for KK Psi, the band fraternity, Kappa Psi. And then I became advisor once after I left for 2, maybe 3 years, and I would come back and I would oversee because I lived fairly close. Now, you made a very good point. Whether it be a senior fraternity brother or sorority sister, or an advisor, those folks are very critical. Those folks are very critical in the organization. And I would dare say if you have you can have a senior fraternity member or sorority member and not have an adult supervision, that's always going to have the propensity for disaster, because there's no authority there, and no guidance through that.
Right.
And I remember distinctly, even as as dean of pledges and even as advisor, my job as dean of pledges was not only to make sure the pledges got their information, but it was also to protect them. Key word, protect them.
Right.
And now, the fraternity brothers, yeah, they had to be involved in the initiation and in the pledge rituals. However, there had to be a degree of sanity, so to speak, within the pledge ritual. So you had to constantly watch some of your fraternity brothers or sorority sisters to make sure some folks just didn't get out the box.
Right. Right.
What I did appreciate about my pledge experience was that we did have the majority of brothers back then, even sorority sisters, who spent more time on the mental, we call it the mental game back then, but it's the mental strengthening, so to speak. So there were certain things that we had to do. It didn't make sense, but it made sense later on. No different than if you were in the military, and I don't mean this in a derogatory fashion, you have to be prepared for battle.
Right.
So with that being said, there was plenty of mental games that were passed down over the years that I learned to appreciate years later, because you had to be quick. Right. You got to move quick.
Right.
But I go back again. The foundation for what we pledged on was education. So it didn't make no difference what you did, have to do rather, regarding pledging. You had to be in study hall. You had to be in study hall. You had to be in study hall.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So the advisor scenario was most critical, because those are the folks that are going to keep everything in line for you. If you don't have those folks in place, or if you have the wrong
folks
in place,
right.
you get what you got.
Yeah, and all of the fraternities and the sorority deals with that. Because just like everybody else, you got some, when you're in a family, you got some sisters, you look at it and be like, oh, that's my
Exactly.
oh,
Exactly.
Like, oh, that's my brother. Be like, oh, yeah. And that's life. And there are some people that I know, and you be like, how did you make it? How did you make it? How did you?
You can't figure it out.
And that's part of it.
Exactly.
But now, let me cap this statement. I mean, this conversation off, that part of the conversation off too. One of the things I noticed too back then, and even now, there are a large number of folks who pledge primarily for a sense of belonging.
Right.
Now, let's be clear. A sense of belonging, and it's great. That's okay. But there comes a need, rather, in that sense of belonging, to where nothing else matters. Nothing else around you matters. And we know some folks who live, breathe their fraternity or sorority. Now, for many of us from an African American background, a large part of our livelihood is faith-based. So you have work, you have church, then anything else.
Right.
But there are a large number of folks back then that pledged during my time, and even therefore afterwards, they know nothing else but their fraternity or sorority. And there's nothing wrong with that to a certain degree, but again, from the facet of serving, that's your main thing.
Right.
Serving.
Right. Serving.
You don't necessarily have to serve in your fraternity.
Right. Yeah.
You serve wherever you are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Every day of the week.
Right.
That's what you pledge for.
Right.
But some folks will become so obsessed with their fraternity for that sense of belonging, nothing else matters. They don't have a relationship anywhere outside. They don't, because they put that much emphasis on their fraternity and sorority. And it becomes a negative experience for a lot of other folks, because again, it interferes with their ability to serve. And I say serve objectively, so to speak. You mentioned something earlier about the rift that we would all have as fraternities and sororities. But and some of my best friends are of other fraternities. And I love it. I mean, it's a great mix.
Right.
But I think it's a great mix because we all literally still pledge for the exact same thing. Doesn't make a difference what color our colors are. We all literally play for the same thing: academic excellence and community. So we all play for the exact same reasons. So, and I think because of that, that's why we have the relationships that we do. We just have different colors.
Right. Exactly.
But again, there are some who, because of that need to belong, or that sense of belonging, and factor in that sense of entitlement too, and control, they become solely obsessed with the fraternity or sorority and pledging. Some folks are just literally, that's all they can't wait till the next pledge line come out.
Exactly.
They can't wait till the next pledge line come out.
Exactly.
They got a wood ready.
Right.
And so that's
isn't that like the let's say in similar instances, and I think the individuals that serve in our military, are some of the most extraordinary people.
Yes, they are.
But also there are some that all the be all and end all, is that military experience. Okay, and if you're not that, if you're not a military man or military, then, well,
nothing else matters.
Yeah, nothing else matters. Or as you mentioned, there are some individuals that get into the various groups, say like the Masons or the Elks or the, whatever.
That's correct.
And it is that 24/7.
Yes.
To the exclusion of almost everything else.
Yes.
So that becomes and part of my subspecialty is in addictions, and that to me looks like an addictive and a dysfunctional process.
Yes.
Okay.
It can become that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and again, not all individuals who have an interest. It's almost like, again, for many people, like a hobby. That they will, I see many deltas, they will be collecting, their elephants and, and this, that, etc. But they have a wider life that's there.
Yes.
But again, as you said, that there's some, and I think part of it is that whatever baggage you come with
That's it.
to that experience,
That's it.
you still carry that baggage throughout.
You hit the nail on the head.
You
hit the nail on the head.
And so, just as you were, explaining, I think very nicely, that more senior brother or sister who is themselves perhaps a young adult, but there is a difference between an 18 or 19 or even 20-year-old and their judgment, and as mental health professionals, we know that certain critical areas of the brain involving judgment are not fully developed until the mid-20s. So that advisor, who hopefully has some sanity in his or her upbringing and in their lives, then becomes that navigator, for folks going through.
That's correct.
So that gets to be very important. But let's get back to the dysfunction, and that is the hazing. I think we had another guest that was coming on. I don't know if they're
he actually evidently he got a call.
Oh, okay.
To take care of. But
okay, go ahead.
But I want to ask you the question, because there's pledging, then there's hazing.
That's correct.
Okay. Has the hazing, and this is an opinion, just asking your opinion, has become headline news, and that if you mention pledging, that it just automatically assumed that you're hazing?
Yes.
And do you think, what is the future for the fraternities and the sororities when it comes to just pledging, which just the history alone? What do you think is going to happen in the future on these campuses when it comes to pledging? Because apparently some of us don't understand that there's pledging, there's hazing. And I'm just asking, actually, the both of you, what you think the future holds?
Unfortunately, I believe that the future for any fraternity and sorority is bleak. Only because, as you mentioned earlier, with the headlines that we're constantly seeing, more frequently, more and more frequently now in the past 5 to 10 years, from a legal standpoint, federally and statewide, but I'm gonna go back to federally, it is it's looking very bleak, only because now, even on our campuses, it has become very difficult to control. Now, yes, as campuses and universities, they have to now put in place anti-hazing law, so to speak. There are some organizations within most of our most of our colleges and universities now, they have to sign an anti-hazing contract. Most bands now, I know the band that I was in at Bethune-Cookman, now they have to sign an anti-hazing contract. You know, so it's gotten that strict now, you know, in our college and universities. So, and then there have been fraternities, sororities who have been kicked off of campus because of hazing.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, it's indefinite, and the rationale behind that is, one, you want to go ahead and just kind of wash out, you know, those folks who were the cause of it, and then start fresh again. But in the same breath, they're not even bringing it back up for reconsideration. So they're pretty much gone, because there's no controls. I mean, we can put something in writing. But how can we monitor it when they're off campus?
No, right, but I think, let's just say on campus, Phi Beta Sigma. Okay, I Kappa, Alpha,
Whomever.
It doesn't matter. I want to maintain, and I want to be, okay, but I still want who we are.
Okay.
Now, do you think that it should come from the grad chapter that's overseeing to make sure that the history and the legacy continues, that it doesn't change to the degree that you're no longer what it was? I mean, how do you think that I mean, you can still pledge is what I'm saying, okay? Up here saying we still want who we are and how we've been since the beginning of time.
Okay.
But we need to oversee, and I guess my question is, how do you handle that on the campus? How do you think you should handle that on the campus?
I agree wholeheartedly that I stand firm on this, because I know this was the scenario when I moved here to Orlando. I do believe that the grad chapters, the local grad chapters, have that charge to directly oversee, you know, the local pledge campuses. I do agree with that, because that's really the only defense that we have to be able to at least monitor and control in some capacity, in sync with the officers, you know, themselves, the senior fraternity officers and stuff. The unfortunate piece is, some years back, when hazing became the forefront of the news, they defined hazing with some of the definitions of what pledging is. And now, let's be careful too now. Terry and I were talking over time, and come to find out, as Terry's very good at doing some research, we found, and it may be I know it's included in our ritual book, and I think Terry found it in his ritual book as well. And you look back into all of our constitutions, hazing has been around for some time.
Right.
Now, let's be clear. It hasn't just started. Hazing has been around for some time. Now, with that being said, I think what has happened is, when hazing came to the forefront of the news, and now legally now we have defined what hazing is, which now includes some of what we define under our pledge, you know, in our pledge rituals. Now some of the things that we did that were productive in initiating a pledgee has now been defined under hazing. So there is a very negative cross that exists now in the definition of word hazing. There was a time, and I just realized this. I just found this out recently. I remember when it came to a head, and they initiated the hazing laws, that they took away, quote unquote, what we define as pledging, and now took it back to the bare minimum of initiation. Well, initiation has none of the other rituals that go to it. Well, come to find out, I didn't realize until Terry and I were talking fairly recently that I do remember most places that I'm familiar with have gone back to pledging, but with some restrictions, of course. So I think what has happened now, even though the hazing law is still in effect, and then you have the hazing contract that has to be signed by everyone involved. We're on that slippery slope. We've allowed it to come back in, but there's no one to govern, monitor, what physically goes on. So that it's almost like you're leaving the kids at the house with a couple of loaded guns, some alcohol, and some drugs. You tell them the right thing to do while they're gone, and you trust that they're going to follow suit.
But that's why I asked the question back to the grad chapter, and understanding the what's going on and how important it is, so we don't lose what we work so hard to gain. So that's why I asked the question about the importance of the grad chapter taking the initiative to make sure that that we can get it right.
Well, here's where it becomes an uphill battle. I made a statement earlier that pledging has graduated, or transcended rather, college and universities down to the high school levels and in the middle school levels. I think the real answer a real solution rather, is going to come not necessarily at the college level. Now we have to go back down to the middle school level and catch these folks, these organizations within the school systems, bands, football teams, all these folks that are now going to eventually go to the post-secondary education. We have to start catching these cats now. So the group that we're seeing now within the next 5 to 6 years, that mindset is already there. So we're going to have to go down to the ground level and start there with these types of dialogues in the schools, with the fraternities and sororities, and make a difference who it is. I would dare to say it would be awesome if we can get all of the fraternities and sororities in each locality and go into these school systems, middle schools and high schools, not one time out the year, but create some type of open dialogue over time, period. So now we had propensity now to not necessarily eradicate it totally, but now we can kind of minimize the possibility of these kids now, this next generation of college students, from going astray, because now they understand what pledging is and what their responsibilities are to pledging. Because remember now, we as pledgees have a responsibility. We have a responsibility not to get our brains knocked out. We have a responsibility, and just briefly, me as an example, when I pledged, I had a couple of cats, run up on me, early on, and I came from a white school background. So we didn't have nowhere near as much of that type of stuff in my school. So, but I had to understand that, okay, I got to go through something to get to this, but there are limitations. The hard piece was, even though I might know my stuff, we're all one. So that means everybody on the line has to know the exact same thing and move as one. So we spend more time making sure the weakest link is not strong as the rest of the spokes of the wheel.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with that being said, we did have an incident that we had a couple of brothers who had some entitlement issues.
Okay. That was my next statement. Yeah. Because it can go the other way.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm ready to press charges because I had to carry his books.
Well,
I'm exaggerating.
Yeah. Well, no, but that's what it's gotten to now since we've enmeshed the two definitions now. We've enmeshed the true definition of pledging with now the new illegal definition of the word hazing. So with that being said, now you get, and it is what it is, now you get folks who will now just walk in the fraternity without having to go through anything. And let's be clear, going through anything means that you still need to go through some type of struggle, not physically, meaning getting your behind whipped, But you have to go through some type of struggle to get to the other side. To get to the other side, because again, the stronger you are, by the time you get to the other side, the more you will be able to do in our communities.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where therein the problem is going to lie. It's going to lie in our ability to come together as a community. As a panelytic group.
Charles, I wanted to ask: Do we still have Terry available to us?
I texted him and told him to call me back when he finished. So
he's still there.
Yeah, he would have some great input.
I lost my train of thought here.
Okay.
When we were talking about when you were talking about the pledging and trying to put it in the proper perspective, even for myself. And when I was younger, there was things that I didn't understand, like you said. Now, when I got older, okay, because I can remember my best friend who I grew up with. He plays cute, and I was didn't fit his personality, but he just loved, and he told me some of the things he had to do, and I look at him like this right here, like what, passing that yoke thing. I was like, passing the yoke, but I got it later on. I got the passing the yoke. I got that. That. But at the time when he told me, I look at him like, y'all did what?
Yeah, right. It doesn't. Yeah, it seems crazy at the moment, but you understand it later.
Right.
And it's like an epiphany when it hits. You're like, wow, okay.
And truth be told, in all societies, just about. There are the rites of passage.
Exactly.
And I think that, and this is one of the things I liked about coming out of the '60s, where individuals went back and took a look at those things that were helpful in transitioning, let's say, from African culture, transitioning from boyhood into manhood. And if you look at, I'm just in the middle of reading Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And one of the things that stood out to me was their ceremony of taking these boys that were young teens. And it was interesting. They gave them challenges that were about doing the things that a man would be expected to do, and it wasn't, something about killing a lion, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of it was about how to work together to solve a particular problem, and in that society, it often was, how do you make a hut to get out of when it's raining, a variety of things like that. So rites of passage, because many of our young people now don't have that.
Nope.
That the fraternity sorority experience, could be that, but often because of the baggage that people come with, because of the sense of entitlement, that the negative. You do as I say,
exactly.
because I am now better than you. Having become
that rings louder.
Yeah, gets to be the message, instead of the message of I am here guiding you into something greater.
That's correct.
Okay, and so we've got the legalities that we have to deal with, but also. I think that having that rite of passage does mean something if it is guided in the right way.
That's correct.
So it means, and I would add on to this, that as psychologists, we may not think that we need to be involved aside from our fraternity membership. Involved with such things as fraternities. But interestingly, wouldn't it be interesting if there was, as part of advisory groups, now this probably never happened, but I just want to put it out there to say, have someone who, and it doesn't have to be a psychologist as such, but have someone as a wiser head that can guide these young recruits,
always.
through the process.
That is correct.
And so the larger thing, and this gets back to something that I'm still doing in the community, and that sense of feeling that I need to give back, because that old saying from Scripture, to whom much has been given, okay, much is required. And I think that if we could keep that sense of not entitlement, but the sense of needing to give back, and both the willingness and the capability of giving back, then some of our young people that are, we'd call it at risk, may have models that they can then follow and say, okay, literally, I can be that when I grow up.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so Charles had asked a question way back. Excuse me. What's the future of fraternities, sororities, etc.? And I think that yes, they're going to be the legal battles. I don't think that they're going to exist in the format or framework that they are now.
No.
But I would ask you that I think that there will be a continuing need, for a form of truly fraternity, or sorority, that sense of coming together, as a way of again assisting young people, and I'm talking about the college experience now, into becoming productive, useful, and young adults prepared to serve. So I wanted your thought on that.
You got about 20 seconds.
Oh boy! Okay.
I firmly take a stand that yes, it has to go. We have to come together as a panelitic group and have this same type of dialogue, but it has to start. We have to go back into our communities collectively from the middle school level, high school level on up. Because again, there's that section of that group that is already going through it right now. Not saying that we can't reel them back in. That still have to come from the local chapters, to be able to do that. But it has to start from the middle. It has to be a collective effort. It has to be. But I go back to the statement you made, which is the statement that's probably missing in all this, is we define pledging rites of passage. If we go back to the premise of rites of passage, then it won't be. It will be less of a hazing experience as opposed to the real definition of what I call pledging. Pledging is really rites of passage. That whole rites of passage experience, because now we learn collectively how to solve problems, and now I know once I go into the world, on my job, in my church, wherever, I am now a viable team member now that's going to be a part of this group to help solve this problem, to move this vehicle forward, to move this help build this kingdom, so to speak, and help make this company successful as a team member. That's the rites of passage experience, doing it together as one. So but it has to come from the adult chapters, to be able to transcend down to the middle school level on up. If we don't do it that way, then yeah, we're destined to be to vanish. To cease to exist, right? Because we're not going to be proactive enough.
Brother Moses, I want to thank you, for your information, your knowledge, your wisdom, and even though Charles is probably still going to talk about that jump shot, as they say, you don't have to worry about that.
Okay. Well, but they say prayer changes things. It's
definitely gone now, so we'll talk about that.
And family, we're probably over time, but I want to say thank you for sharing another Friday night with us. And join us next week as we continue this journey. Again, the journey being that from you to me and from me to you. Good night. See you next week.